How's it going, YouTube? Coming to today with another video, and today, guys, what they're bringing to you is going to be the top 5 decks that I absolutely despise in this game's history, and we'll talk about them. So there's definitely going to be a couple, even in your own gameplay, I'm sure, that you've seen that you're like, you know what, I really hate this deck, and we'll talk about why mine are the way they are. But if you haven't already checked out my sponsors over at Imperium, Dragonshield, Gem, Cloud, Riw Hobbies and Games, Grimoire, or ChainLink, definitely go ahead and check them all out down below in the description. Without further ado, let's hop right into the first deck. First one's Labyrinth. I absolutely despise this deck. This deck is so ignorant. It's just like one of those things that you can keep recycling normal traps, which historically have just been broken, especially having access to things like DDG, D-Barrier, the regular welcome traps, especially if they get like Labyrinth online. Skill Drain, they can play D-Shifter if they're not on heavy furniture. It's just really annoying to deal with, and at least for me, I think the back row decks have always been the worst to play into, and honestly, like, Runic Stun isn't even in this list of top 5. I think that a deck like this is way more obnoxious than something like Runic Stun. Not to mention the hand rip that they get on you twice as well if their hand in the first half is broken, because you also get things like rollback. So, I mean, this deck is just absolutely absurd and is definitely just not one of my favorites. Virtual World. Now, I hate this deck for 2 reasons. One, I hate this deck is because I literally just could never get myself to play it. Every single time I tried playing Virtual World, it was like the most bricky, just couldn't really get behind wanting to play the deck, right? And it was just in the format where True King of all Calamities was legal. We call it count to 9 format because if you can get to a rank 9, you win the game. But the big problem was when your opponent would not even put up 1, they put up 2 Calamity. And then it was just absurd. Because the other thing that would happen is you would open an Imperm, and then your opponent would go detach off Calamity, and then you Imperm, and they chain Chuche to pop their own Calamity. So it was just a really absurd format, and that's a format where you would want to play a deck where you set 5, right? But other than that, like, it was pretty obnoxious to play against, and it's something that I definitely would never want to see again. Even in, like, today's age, I think that, like, Virtual World is a bit cooler just because you play, like, the Armored Xyz package and whatnot. But it's still just a deck that, I don't even know why, but I cannot play that deck to save my life, and it's something that I don't even want to play, right? And definitely let me know down below in the comment section, what's a deck that you feel the same way about? Like, you understand that there's hype behind it, but you just won't play it. You know, for a while, it's really funny, I actually hated Striker, and I would not play it. I refused to play it until one day I actually sat down and, like, really learned how to play it, and then it was one of my favorite decks of all time. But for a while, Striker would have been on this list, which is really funny for me, right? But I'm really happy that I ended up playing that deck instead. Now, Goky. I hate hand loops so much. I despise it. It's worse than anything else in this game. Anything at all. I think hand loops are the most degen thing possible. It's just really dumb to play against, right? Because if you don't open up like the perfect hand to deal with this, you're just dead. And this is a format back when we didn't have half the hand traps we do now. So I think maybe now it would be like okay if this was a thing at this level of power, but I can only imagine if things like Gumblar were legal and Snake Eyes, oh my god, that'd be so bad. I think the worst thing about this was being able to start off with Connector, and then you check for hand traps, so like you really had to open up a perfect hand to deal with this. Otherwise, you're kind of comparing hands, you know? And it was very much so a dice roll format. People used to play Gemini Imps to try and deal with this, which was crazy. But I definitely did not enjoy myself at all in this format. I really didn't. The next one's Flu, especially right off rip when this deck had Wind Barrier Statue. At least we had like full power tier to deal with this, but like this deck was so ridiculous. I remember there's one time when my opponent had like full God board. I started off my turn draw phase with Droplet send 1 to negate the barrier statue, and then my opponent had like flipped the trap, summoned a monster, used the monster effect, and then I gammaed, and then from there it was just over, right? That was great. I think another time I also milled all Empens out of my opponent's deck, which is crazy. But overall, I think this deck has just been a menace. It just plays through so many things, especially when it had everything. But even now, right, it's still pretty much full power, just outside of like the barrier statue. It's definitely fallen off a little bit, but every time you sit down against Flu, you're definitely worried, you know? And it's one thing where like the deck can brick, but when it doesn't, it's rough to play against, especially with cards like Harpy's Featherstorm, which I really don't know how are still legal. It just makes for a really unplayable game state, which is really unfortunate. Now for the next one here is going to be Kashtira. This is the last one, and this is probably the most obnoxious out of anything. I honestly think that when they hit this deck, if they would have banned Shifter and left the Rise Heart legal and like limited Birth, I'd be completely okay with how this deck plays. But then I think about things like Snake Eye, and if you had Snake Eye Cash and you're ending on a Rise Heart on top of the Snake Eye end board, that would be kind of rough. But overall, I do think that Kashtira was definitely like the #1 offender out of any deck I've ever played against, just because this deck had the extra deck rip. It was able to banish cards face down. You banished out of the graveyard. You had a Rise Heart which interacted with your banished cards. Just things that should have never happened, right? And it was even crazier when everyone started tacking in things like Lance. So you try to deal with the Rise Heart, and then you're just like, I got Lance, all right? So I think that there is definitely a lot of issues revolving around this deck, but for me, it's definitely like one of the worst offenders, just because like it had so much power, and it could just play in very simplified game states too, because the monsters were just gigantic, especially with the field spell. But definitely let me know down below in the comment section, what is a deck that you hate the most? I know we all have them. I know that we all are at certain points where we're like, you know what? Maybe I'm taking a break just because the decks aren't what you want to play against in the format. But I feel like it's really good to have discourse like this too, because at the end of the day, we all play a card game, and we're not all going to love some of the decks that we're playing against, and we're going to have extreme hatred for other decks as well. Definitely let me know down below in the comment section what is your most hated deck, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.